Hello, welcome to Comic Tropes. I'm your host, Chris. Folks, a few weeks ago, we lost a titan in the world of comics, Neal Adams. He was an artist, not just any artist. He was a superstar artist. He was a beloved one who had a lengthy career, and he was very prolific. Now, he was so prolific that I really can't summarize everything important that he did in one video. But what I do want to do today is use my platform to talk about three elements of Neal Adams' career. I want to talk about how he became a superstar artist in the 1970s. I want to talk about how he used that status to help raise up some of the next generation of artists in comics, as well as using his status to help previous generations of artists. So, without any further ado, let's discuss Neal Adams. Depending on when you started reading comics, you may consider him a personal favorite, or you may have just heard his name and noted some of his famous covers. But Neal Adams was a big deal. Of course, both comic book and regular news sites covered his passing. But the Jewish newspapers also went into depth on Neal's life. We'll explain why later. There were also tributes from both Marvel and DC. And several comic creators, including names like Dennis Cohen, Larry Hama, and Bill Sienkiewicz, all mourned Adams' passing while referring to him as a father figure. How did all of this come to pass? Born in 1941, Neal Adams moved around a lot as a child, being the son of an army family. In an interview with Howard Chaykin, Adams explained how that led to his interest in art. Adams said, quote, "When I was a kid traveling around from town to town, tragically facing the consequences of losing all my old friends and assuming I would never get new friends, I discovered that unlike everyone else around me, I could draw. So I would draw and give kids the drawings. I would draw for the teachers. I, like everyone else of my ilk, became the class or school artist. There are one or two in every school. Although my inclination was towards drawing Bigfoot stuff, I was drawn towards the Batmans and Blackhawks. At 10 years old, I was drawing Atomic Mouse, but I was also drawing and writing a Batman encyclopedia. I wanted to be an artist or a scientist, but I knew I could never afford to go to college. Then, my mother found an art high school. This was New York's High School of Art and Design, a vocational school that had previously given the world such artists as John Romita Sr., Alex Toth, and Carmine Infantino, among others. Growing up a comics fan of books like Tarzan and Super Snipe, Adams tried to get work at DC Comics and then Archie. There, the editors saw some talent, and Adams' first professional work was a small portion of Adventures of the Fly number 4 from 1960. Neal tried to apply to work on the superhero stuff that Jack Kirby and Joe Simon were doing for Archie, and he had to leave his samples. While he got rejected for that work, two things happened. First, the editor of The Fly preferred a panel Adams had drawn of Tommy Troy transforming into the Fly. So, they cut that out of the samples and paid Adams 1/3 of their page rate. Second, Archie let him work on some of their humor books, pages like this one from Archie's joke book number 44. He worked there for a few months before leaving under what he has said was not the best of circumstances. He was soon recommended as an assistant to artist Howard Nostrand and illustrated some of the Bat Masterson comic strips for newspapers. That only lasted 3 months and paid a measly $11.50 a week. However, through Nostrand, he met illustrator Elmer Wexler, who eventually recommended Adams to the Johnstone and Cushing Advertising Agency. There, Adams would illustrate comics for clients such as AT&T, and was eventually assigned the newspaper strip adaptation of the television medical drama Ben Casey. That strip ran from 1962 through 1966. His time at the ad agency taught him how to draw quickly, to be clear, and built on a photorealistic style that would display what he came to be known for. So we've taken a look at Neal Adams' work at Archie in 1960 all the way through the Ben Casey comic strip in 1966. And I do this to illustrate that Neal Adams was not an overnight success. I think if we look at his work, it's impeccable from the beginning. It looks fantastic. Just seemed to take comics a little while to notice that. In 1967, Adams got some work at Warren Comics, where editor Al Williamson appreciated his work and assigned him some issues of Creepy and Eerie magazines. Finally, Adams was able to cut loose a bit and show his penchant for dark and atmospheric shading, dynamic panel layouts, and expressive, photorealistic expressions. That same year, Adams finally got work at DC Comics, working on superheroes, which had been his goal all along. The previous year, Carmine Infantino had become editorial director, and DC was finally a bit more open to hiring new talent. Adams worked on Carmine's co-creation Deadman, taking over alongside writer Jack Miller after the first issue. Neal Adams' art was unlike anything else on the comics racks at the time, much more detailed than anything readers were used to. Neal would take whatever work DC had, which was very diverse. He took over Our Army at War from Joe Kubert and also worked on DC's humor books like Jerry Lewis and Bob Hope. This was also when he met editor and inker Dick Giordano, who would soon become a key ally. Editor Mort Weisinger noted Adams' talent and had him create covers for Action Comics, Lois Lane, and, in March of 1968, Batman on issue 67 of The Brave and the Bold. Weisinger gave Adams World's Finest, starring Superman and Batman, beginning with issue 175. That same year, Neal Adams took some work at Marvel Comics, having heard from Jim Steranko about how the Marvel method of making comics allowed the artist a lot more freedom in pacing out and shaping the story. So Adams asked what their lowest selling title was. At the time, that was X-Men, and he drew that from issue 56 through 63. These issues are gorgeous, with thanks to the exceptionally detailed inks by Tom Palmer, an excellent fit for Neal Adams. Adams created panel layouts that had never been seen before, like this notable one of Beast falling down an elevator shaft. It was radically different than the standard stacks of panels most comics used at the time. Adams created eye-grabbing covers that displayed depth, power, and engaging design work. His pages felt cinematic and epic in comparison to everything else. Perhaps most notably, Neal Adams was using his real name at both DC Comics and Marvel Comics, working for competitors simultaneously. That was not the norm. While it had been done here and there before, the norm was a guy like Gene Colan, a super talented artist, would work under the pen name Adam Austin if he was working at the other company. But Neal Adams was like, no, you want to work with me? I'm going to work under my real name. And that may sound minor now, but it was a big deal at the time, and it allowed future generations of artists to work as themselves, which helped them form their own fandoms and followings. So it really did make a big impact. Going into the 70s, Adams' career would only grow. He began working with writer Denny O'Neil in 1970 on the Green Lantern Green Arrow title. It brought things down to earth, with the two on a road trip to help Green Lantern reconnect with the common man. That run dealt with serious issues, like drug abuse, when Green Arrow's sidekick was found to be using heroin. It also introduced one of DC's first major black superheroes, John Stewart, a new Green Lantern who showed up in the pages of issue 87. Adams and O'Neil also had one of the all-time most respected runs on Batman. They brought Joker back to being a scary maniac as he was originally portrayed. They co-created new monsters like Man-Bat, and Neal's art brought a new arch-enemy to life, Ra's al Ghul, an eco-terrorist who challenged Batman on a global scale that brought James Bond-esque travel, romance, and battles to the title. Neal's moody covers seemed to yell out that this Batman had moved on from his campy sci-fi adventures of the 50s and 60s, and readers loved it. Meanwhile, Adams also worked at Marvel on their flagship title, The Avengers, with writer Roy Thomas, crafting one of Marvel's first huge events when they placed Earth's mightiest heroes between the warring alien factions of the Kree and the Skrull. And when DC made the famous Superman vs. Muhammad Ali comic in 1978, who else could illustrate it other than Neal Adams? That's a serious question. His realistic style was perfect for capturing an actual celebrity's likeness, but he also had the talent and experience to illustrate Superman and make him look accurate and make the whole book look fluid and exciting, not stiff and overly referenced. No shade against the top talents of the day like Jack Kirby and Joe Kubert, but only Neal could have made that book work. And while Adams would continue to sporadically contribute to mainstream superheroes, in 1971 he decided it was time to start forging his own path, launching Continuity Associates with Dick Giordano. And this brings us to the next stage in Neal Adams' career. Continuity Associates, built on Adams' experience working for both an ad agency and the comics industry, they were designed as a company to do things like concept art, storyboards, animatics for commercials, TV, and film. Continuity would do everything from storyboards for a company like Cheerios to CGI ads like the famous Nasonex Bee. Adams and Giordano employed dozens of artists, and whenever they worked on a project together, Adams called them the Crusty Bunkers, which doesn't really mean anything, it's just a silly name. Continuity also would deliver a full creative team to comics publishers, including Marvel and DC, as well as Charlton and Atlas. This meant they took on emerging artists and gave them the experience needed to go out into comics on their own. And outside of running his own art studio, Neal would give guidance to some aspiring professionals. Bob McLeod, co-creator of the New Mutants, tells a story of Neal looking at his samples and calling up Marvel with a recommendation, getting him hired there. Frank Miller began showing up to the studio to ask Neal's advice and would continue to come in every week or two for several months, listening carefully in an effort to improve. Eventually, Miller was able to get a short story published at Gold Key, and within a year, he was working for Marvel on Daredevil. Another famous artist, Bill Sienkiewicz, has his own impressionistic style, but when he first broke in, you can see that he clearly wanted to be just like Neal Adams. His initial pages on Moon Knight almost look like Neal himself did them. Adams wasn't just a superstar, he was inspiring and influencing a new generation of artists. Just before he got Continuity up and running, Neal was working to improve the field for comics creators. In 1969, Adams formed the Academy of Comic Book Arts alongside Stan Lee and Carmine Infantino. Adams' goal was to create an organization that would allow comics creators to unionize to get better pay and working conditions. Lee and Infantino had envisioned it as more of a promotional organization and soon departed. The organization ended in 1977, but Adams helped form a new one in 1978 called the Comics Creators Guild, again looking to improve creators' rights. He formed Continuity Comics, which allowed the creators to own their own creations. Some of their more famous books that were published include Bucky O'Hare and Miss Mystic. A small sampling of the continuity artists would include Walt Simonson, Howard Chaykin, Larry Hama, Trevor Von Eden, Jim Starlin, and Bernie Wrightson. Some of the issues that Continuity made included Marvel Premiere, Deadly Hands of Kung Fu, Mr. Miracle, and $6 Million Man. DC's title Weird Worlds had issues 2 and 3 credited to C. Bunker. Working like this formed a camaraderie amongst the artists at Continuity. They were well known for taking reference photos with one another, or huddling around a drawing table to all ink at once to hit a tight deadline. This is all an example of Neal looking out for the next generation of artists, but simultaneously, Neal was taking steps to help the previous generation of artists. In 1938, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster created Superman. During World War II, Siegel was drafted, breaking up the team. During the war, Siegel learned that the company began making Superboy without paying him for the idea, which he had pitched them. Siegel and Shuster decided to let their contracts expire and sue for the rights to Superman and Superboy. They lost on Superman, but gained enough rights on Superboy that DC settled out of court for the equivalent of about $1 million. This also took the creators' bylines off Superman comics as of 1947. Cut to the mid-1970s, when the big-budget live-action Superman movie was being made. At this point, Shuster's eyesight left him legally blind, and he lived in a nursing home. Siegel made ends meet working at the post office. DC paid them nothing. Siegel issued a press release cursing the movie and making it clear that he and Shuster were paid nothing. When Neal Adams read that, he reacted. Adams teamed up with Jerry Robinson, a Batman artist who is now the president of the Association of American Editorial Cartoonists, and lawyer Ed Price, also a publisher. These men went to every press outlet or talk show that they could and put pressure on DC. Eventually, DC relented and provided the creators of Superman with a $20,000 a year pension, health benefits, and their creator byline on the books. Marvel Comics had long held on to the original artwork for their comics until the mid-70s. Even then, they would not release Jack Kirby's original artwork to him without him signing over an onerous contract that stated he could not publicly show or sell the artwork. Kirby and Marvel had a standoff over the issue for years, until Gary Groth and the Comics Journal broke the story to the public in their February 1986 issue. Neal Adams quickly championed Kirby's cause, aided by Frank Miller, Gary Trudeau. It took a year of bad publicity until Marvel relented in May of 1987 and returned all of Jack Kirby's art, as well as Neal Adams' art, to the creators. Neal stayed invested in the moral right of artists owning their own artwork. In 2006, Neal began arguing for the return of Dina Babbitt's artwork. Dina was a Holocaust survivor who was ordered to paint for the Nazi doctor Joseph Mengele. After the war, the artwork ended up in a German museum. Neal continued his crusade to get Dina's artwork returned to her through her passing in 2009. This is all to say that Neal Adams did not come upon his success easily, and once he did, he used that status to both employ others and fight for creators' rights. Neal was a guy who was probably the most influential artist after Jack Kirby. He was dynamic, but also realistic. I think that when we look at some of his questionable comics like Skate Man or Mr. T, yeah, haha, the story wasn't up to snuff, but the artwork was always beyond reproach, as was the character of the man. Comics deserves more guys like Neal Adams, but we're lucky to have had the one. Thank you so much for watching. I will be back next week with another episode of Comic Tropes. If you enjoyed this, it really helps if you hit things like, subscribe, maybe leave a comment, or share this with somebody else. Also, I do a weekly live show on Mondays where I do quick reviews of the comics and comic book news of the past week. That's on my second channel, which is called Pros and Cons. Hope you'll consider checking that out. And until I see you next time, keep reading comics. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, please consider hitting like and subscribe. If you'd like to support the show, there are merchandise links beneath the YouTube video, and you can always hit join on YouTube or visit Comic Tropes on Patreon to get access to special perks. Neal Adams. It's a lot to cover. I don't know what else I'm going to say. Growing up a comics fan of books like Tarzan and Super Snake, that's totally made up, but not that different from the actual book. Okay, here we go. First, the editor of The Fly preferred a panel Adams had drawn of Tommy Troy transforming into the Fly. So, Archie... not Archie himself. Let's rephrase that. That same year, Neal Adams took work at Marvel Comics. I almost said that right. A new Green Lantern who showed up. Continuity Associates would do art for clients, including things like storyboards, animatics, I don't know what else, but all sorts of cool stuff. Working together to ink a page all together.